What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing yet another hero guide, this time focusing on arguably the best character in the entire game, which is Bossk. Now, Bossk would easily have to be one of the most versatile characters in the game, as he can do well in pretty much any situation you find yourself in, although in saying that, he does also have some flaws that can make him pretty hard to get used to, so hopefully this guide will help some of you out. If you haven't seen my latest hero guides, then I will leave a link on screen at the end of the video, as well as a card up in the top right of your screen, so make sure to go and check those ones out as well. With all of that out of the way though, we are going to go ahead and get stuck right into it. So we're going to start off with his base stats, and like I mentioned in all of these hero guides, all of these stats have been double checked by both myself and one of my subscribers, and there will be a link in the description where you can find his Reddit post with all of these stats. Now, we both tested these in arcade, and while I'm 99% sure all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may change from arcade to multiplayer. So if you see any stats that don't seem right, then definitely feel free to let me know down in the comment section. So first off, we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have a very small amount of base health, coming in at 600, which is actually the second lowest in the game. There is a catch though, he's also the only character in the game who can fully regen his health at all times, with a 600 health regen pool, so that is definitely a massive plus, and it is a large part of why he's one of the better characters in the game. Now, his weapon of choice is his Ralby V10, which is definitely a pretty unique weapon. Technically it is a sniper rifle, however it does do pretty well with hipfire as well, so long as you are a good aim. However, I wouldn't rely on the hipfire too much at all. If you zoom in, it will begin to charge the blasters, which you can see with the circle around the crosshair, and it does deal a whole lot more damage when it is charged up. From the hip, it deals 126 damage to the body, as well as 126 to the head as well, surprisingly, although it does cause the enemy to stagger as well. Now, this was tested multiple times, but again, this may be different in multiplayer. It's hard to actually confirm whether it does deal more damage to the head in multiplayer, because off the top of my head, I can't actually ever remember getting a hipfire headshot with it, so we'll just assume that the arcade stats are correct. With that being said, it may very well deal more damage, so just bear in mind that this is a bit of an unknown stat compared to the rest. Fully charged, it will deal 156 damage to the body, meaning it will one-hit kill all classes but the heavy, and it will one-hit kill any class with a headshot too, coming in at 248 damage when fully charged to the head. It does have a fairly slow rate of fire though, and the spread is what I would consider to be low to medium, as from the hip it's definitely not great, however scoped in it is definitely a very accurate blaster. Now, moving on to his abilities, and this is what sets Bossk apart from the rest, as his abilities are all extremely deadly, and in my opinion easily the best combination of abilities from any character in the game. His L1 ability is his Dioxis grenade, and this causes Bossk to throw a grenade that explodes on impact, spewing out very deadly Dioxis gas. It will deal 110 damage all up if the enemy stays within the gas for the whole duration, with the duration being roughly 6 seconds without any star cards equipped. This ability is absolutely amazing at sending your enemies into a panic and clearing out hallways and rooms, and it does set enemies up to be easily taken out, as you can push in and take them out since they will have lowered health. Its only real downside is that it won't regularly get you kills. It does happen somewhat often, but most of the time it will just get a heap of hit markers. However, it definitely does still do a very good job. Moving on to his L1R1 ability, and this one is called Predator Instincts. Now, while this ability is active, Bossk will start firing micro grenades from his Ralby, which deals roughly 60 to 80 damage per hit, so he will take out most regular troopers in anywhere from 2 to 4 shots. It does also give you thermal vision at the same time, as well as a slightly stronger melee. However, this seems to not work from time to time, so that's not something that you want to rely on. To be honest, this is probably his best ability. It is perfect again for clearing out large groups of enemies in hallways or rooms, and the thermal vision is also amazing for situational awareness, as you can pretty much find out where all the enemies are and figure out the best way to try and take them out. Its only downside is that, like I said, it can often bug out, leaving the melee damage the same, as well as even not showing the thermal outlines of your enemies when the screen does go blue, which can be a bit of a trouble, as it definitely is pretty hard to see your enemies when that does happen. Moving on to the R1 ability, which is his proximity mines, and again this is another very useful and very deadly ability. Bossk throws down 3 sticky mines that will explode as soon as the enemy comes within their range, although as soon as you throw them down there is a 3-second period where they won't go off, just pretty much for balancing purposes. Each mine deals 75 damage on its own, so all 3 combined will cause 225 damage, meaning this can take out any regular trooper, if not more than one, as the explosive damage does allow it to damage a whole heap of enemies at once. These things are great, as you can use them both offensively and defensively, either throwing them down behind you to cut off enemy flanks or choke points, or by rushing your enemy and throwing them down, giving them 3 seconds to either run or eventually die. As for the weaknesses, honestly, I couldn't even think of one single weakness for the mines. If you guys can think of anything, feel free to let me know down in the comments, but in my opinion, there really is no downside to these at all. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Obviously it does really come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the 3 or 4 cards that I think are the most important and most well suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his Ultimate Predator card, and this makes it so that each kill you get with the Predator Instincts will increase the duration of the ability by up to 30%. This is easily one of the most useful cards for situations where there are large groups of enemies. It pretty much allows the ability to last a much longer time, and if you can manage to get a kill every 3 or so seconds, it can actually be pretty much infinite, as far-fetched as that may be. The next card I'd recommend using is the Unrelenting Predator card, and this is another card relating to the Predator Instincts ability. With this card equipped, each kill you get with the Predator Instincts will actually make all of his other abilities recharge quicker by up to 14%, and like I mentioned earlier, his abilities are what makes him so good, so the more often you can use them, the more likely you are to do well. The third card I'm going to recommend is his Trap Arming Speed, and this pretty much just reduces the activation time on the proximity mines, meaning they will go off up to 60% faster on the initial deployment. This is one that on paper doesn't sound all that useful, however this just makes the proximity mines much more of an aggressive ability as they're much faster to explode, so if you run into a room full of enemies, throw them down and then run back to safety, they can be a very deadly ability. A lot of people use the Multi-Trap card instead, and don't get me wrong, that is definitely a very good card too, but I personally just prefer this one, and I think it has a little bit more to offer. Now, these 3 cards are the 3 that I personally find to be the most useful for Galactic Assault. However, I will touch on some more cards as well, just in case some of these cards don't suit your playstyle, as he definitely does have some other very useful star cards as well. The next card worth mentioning is his Name Your Poison card, and honestly I have used this card probably more than any of his cards in my time playing as Bossk, but I have decided to switch it out recently for the card that I just mentioned. This card actually makes it so that when you throw down your Dioxys and stand in the cloud, it will actually regen your health, so this is a great card to use if you do find yourself getting killed too quickly. Simply run to a bit of cover and throw it down at your feet and you will be back to full health in no time at all. The main reason I've swapped this card out is that he does already fully regen anyway, and so this card definitely isn't a necessity, but it is still definitely a very good card to use. As for the last one, the Predator Resilience card is a great card as well. This one pretty much just reduces the amount of damage you take when using the Predator Instincts ability, so this one is pretty self-explanatory. Definitely a good card to use if you mainly use his micro grenades in dangerous areas. Now again, these are just the cards that I personally think are the most useful, however he does also have some other really handy cards as well, so I'd still recommend to test them all out for yourself and try and figure out which ones suit you the best, although the ones I have mentioned are just a good place to start if you're not too sure what to choose. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Bossk on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Naboo, Jakku and Hoth. All of these maps are perfect for Bossk, and some of you guys may be wondering why I've picked Jakku over some of the other maps, but the reason behind this one is that I do think he's the best choice for this map over the other characters. Even though he may have some better suited maps, I definitely wanted to add this in there because he can completely turn the tide of the game, and we all know just how hard Jakku can be to win as the First Order. Now obviously this doesn't mean these are the only 3 maps to choose him on, and if I'm going to be honest, I could pretty much just put every single map in the game on here, as he does do well on every single map in the game, but these are just the 3 that I think are some of his best maps. Now as for some tips for Galactic Assault, and the main tip I need to mention is to make sure you're using his abilities as often as possible, as like I mentioned before, his abilities are what sets him apart from the rest. Obviously, if there are no enemies around, then you shouldn't just use them for the sake of using them, but pretty much any time you see a few enemies, you should just really try and make the most of your abilities. Whether you combine one ability with your blaster, or whether you combine different abilities at once, it doesn't really matter. I slightly touched on this earlier, but one really good combo is to use both the Dioxys and the micro grenades at the same time. For example, on a map like Naboo on that second phase with the tight hallways, if you and your team are struggling to push through, then Bossk alone can be an absolute game changer. In that kind of situation, if you quickly activate Predator Instincts, then throw down your Dioxys, you'll know exactly where your teammates are due to the heat vision, and then the Dioxys will start to clear them out, and so at that point you can pretty much just rush in there spamming your grenades and you're almost guaranteed to clear the area. Now this does need to be done with caution. Obviously most of the time you should be fine doing something like that, but just make sure to not get too ahead of yourself, otherwise you can easily be taken out due to his low health pool. Another good tip is to use your proximity mines in a bit more of an aggressive way rather than using them as actual mines. With the Trap Arming Speed card that I mentioned earlier, you can throw these down almost like a grenade and then take out enemies with them rather than just setting them up to cut off parts of the map, so definitely just try and make the most of them whenever they are available for use. You also want to try and make the most of his higher jump by getting into some dangerous spots on the map. If you can get up on rooftops and stuff like that, then you can be even more dangerous than normal, so definitely try and make the most of that whenever possible. Touching on that even further, you should try and get yourself into some pretty dangerous spots on the map at all times, really pushing your enemies back and allowing for the rest of your team to push up and help you win control. On a map like Naboo, again for example, you really should be the one to try and push into those objectives so that your teammates can follow you in. His abilities are just so perfectly suited to these kinds of situations, and so if you do get a chance to push the enemy back, then you should definitely help lead your team into battle. Pretty much at the end of the day, the best way to sum Bossk up is just to use his abilities whenever you get a chance and pretty much just be a complete menace to the other team. If you're on an open map, make the most of his sniper at long range, or if you're on a close quarters type of map, then use his abilities and just continue to let your enemies know you're there by dealing plenty of damage. With some practice and some of these tips, I'm sure you guys can go on some absolutely mental kill streaks with Bossk, as like I said, he's probably one of the best and definitely the most versatile character in the whole game. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some of the tips for the hero vs villain game modes. Starting off with the best star cards, and all of these cards have actually been mentioned already, so I'll try and skim through these a little quicker. The first card I'm going to recommend is the Predator Resilience card that reduces damage when you're using the Predator Instincts ability, and again this speaks for itself. This ability deals plenty of damage to heroes, and so if you can take less damage while using it, then it will definitely result in less deaths per game. The next card I use is the Unrelenting Predator card again, which is the card that reduces his abilities with each enemy killed. Pretty much the more often your abilities are available, the more likely you'll be able to survive, so this is definitely another very handy card to use. As for the third card, I can't recommend the Trap Arming Speed card enough. If an enemy is charging towards you, then this just allows you to throw down the mines and have them go off much quicker, which can really be the difference between life and death. These are the three cards that I personally use in the hero modes, but again, this doesn't mean that these are the only three cards to use, so definitely feel free to leave your own cards down below if you do tend to disagree with my choices. Now, moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and honestly, there isn't actually too much to go through here because I've already touched on a lot of it earlier in the video. Bossk really does play these modes very similar to how he plays Galactic Assault. Again, you just want to make the most of your abilities and the high jump and pretty much just be a nuisance to the enemy team. I find that if you try and play off on your own, you can be killed very quickly because of his low health pool and lack of defensive abilities, but if you're with your teammates as often as possible, then you're honestly almost guaranteed to come near the top of the leaderboard, as you can deal so much damage and rack in those points nice and easy. Again, there really isn't too much to go over here. If you just play similar to how I mentioned in Galactic Assault, then you can do extremely well. Just don't play too aggressively in terms of running around on your own, and you should be perfectly fine in these modes. Now, in terms of some characters to watch out for in these modes, and I definitely have to say that Chewie, Lando, Finn and Obi-Wan are the main characters that you do need to keep an eye on. Chewie and Lando having stun abilities are extremely deadly, as they can both easily take you out in just a few seconds from full health if they do manage to stun you, so definitely keep an eye out for these two. As for Finn, his Deadeye ability is probably the best counter to Bossk, as it deals a lot of damage very fast, and the fact that all the shots will land mean there's often not much you can do at all in that situation. As for Obi-Wan, his Force Push and Mind Trick abilities are deadly to Bossk, as again he has absolutely no way to defend against them, and so if he hits you with either of these and then follows up with a few quick swings of his saber, you can be taken out in just a matter of seconds. Honestly, with Bosk's low HP, he can pretty much be troubled by every character in the game in the wrong situation, but that's not to say he can't do well either. You just have to make sure to play to his strengths. If you play it smart, stick close by your teammates and make sure to make the most of your abilities whenever possible. You can definitely do very well as Bossk in HVV and Hero Showdown. So that is going to be it for our Bossk Hero Guide, guys. Like I said, he definitely is one of the better and most consistent characters in the game, so hopefully some of these tips will help you guys out. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to leave a like down below. Not only does it help support the channel, but it does also show me that you guys do want to see more of these updated hero guides. The next guide will most likely be a Han Solo guide, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that one as well. If you are new to the channel, then definitely feel free to subscribe and make sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 guides or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.